my role is Senior Vice President for Gas for Xcel Energy. And I take care of our assets for all 8 states. And the easiest way for me to talk about it is just say, I am responsible for our gas assets. That includes our safety culture. These gentlemen have talked about that. And it also includes the safety of the public around our assets. And I'll put it that simply. We take that role very, very seriously in the utility industry. We're right next to your home. I am also honored to serve on the Pipeline Advisory Committee, PHMSA's Pipeline Advisory Committee. It's been an interesting opportunity for me, and I'm sure it will be going forward too as we take on the new rules. I'm not going to get into safety management system because I thought Sean did a really nice job of covering that. We've adopted it and we're on that journey, and it's really a fascinating one. We are discovering some interesting things within our culture and are working diligently to change that culture. I'm also not going to talk about stakeholder engagement because I think CJ did a nice job on that as well. Just the arrow, right? Yes. So I have to put up a couple of the obligatory slides, right, about your company. We are a combo utility, and we have a very diverse asset base. We are also the #1 wind energy provider for about the last 11 years. So CJ's comments are pretty interesting as we've integrated wind into our electric generation portfolio. It's not a trivial matter to do that for a big company. And then I also have quite a few gas assets, and they are in 8 states, and it's a pretty diverse operating environment. I like to say I have everything from lines under the Mississippi River to probably the highest pipeline in North America, although maybe some of my Canadian friends might dispute that, but I have a couple of them at 12,000 feet. And along with all of that diversity comes everything from rural, suburban, urban, and even some wilderness areas in the Colorado Rockies. So we have quite the operating environment that we're dealing with and trying to keep safe every day. A lot of challenges along the way. I also have 8 states that I am working with, as well as my friends at PHMSA. So it's no end of challenges when it comes to the asset mix that we have. And what I'll say about that, and my predecessors were pretty creative people, and I think that's true of most companies. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. If you think about the post-war boom and the way the country grew, people got pretty creative about what they were doing with their trying to get basic utility services to people as the country grew. And that's really what the operators are dealing with a lot of times. It's just a lot of that kind of historical and legacy things that we're dealing with. So I wanted to just take a minute. This is a very simple slide. I'm just going to tell you that. It's a pretty simplified slide. But I did want to just chat for a minute about how the rules get made. Our friends at PHMSA do the heavy lifting and do a lot of the rule making. The states do adopt those rules, and they can add and do stricter rules based on what they see within their individual operating areas. We've got some states that have adopted things that are more strict. And then our state utility commissions determine reasonable customer rates. And they are good people trying to do good work, right? And they are very, very concerned about the affordability of utility services within the states. And that is something that we keep in mind as we are working with our states. I put up a pace of work up here because, you know, it's been mentioned a few times already in the conferences I've listened. We spent a lot of time talking about the code and what it means. I've heard people say it. I believe it. It is the minimum. It is not the only thing that we should do. We do struggle at times in the utility sector to get people to understand that. And, you know, go back to that prior one about they determine the reasonable rates. there's a lot of times what we hear is, this is what it says in the code, and therefore this is what we will grant your rate structure around. Now, having said that, I'm not advocating that we put more rules in place, because the operators face, you heard me talk about my diverse operating environment and all the different things that not every operator has, all of the challenges that every other operator has. So if you don't have some tools in the toolbox, right, and you're just having everybody do the same stuff, you're never going to cover it all. You just are never going to cover it all. So there's a balance there that we've got to deal with on a pretty regular basis, and it is a reality whether we want to admit it or not. It really is a reality. So I'm going to kind of deviate from what Sean and CJ said, and I'm just going to give you lists, okay, of what does the industry want, and we can talk about that. Uh-oh, I've done something I shouldn't have done. I should not be allowed around technology, okay? So I've split this up into several categories here, and I'll start with pipeline safety. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about damage prevention because we've talked a lot about it, but I think that kind of sums it up. I want excavators who practice best practices, please, right? And I'm going to add to that I would sure like to see fewer exemptions from the rules, right? And so most of those exemptions, quite frankly, are a lot of the local muni, right? So think water and sewer. I love them to death. I really do. My team spends a lot of time working with them, and they're everywhere I am. If I got a gas pipeline, there's probably a water line right there, and electrical line, right? And it's usually me when it's electric, right? So, we could use less exemptions. I'll just leave it at that. Performance-based safety regulations and rules that benefit public safety. You heard me talk about the diverse operating region. What works in downtown Denver or downtown St. Paul is not how I need to handle a pipeline on the top of Rollins Pass. Those are two separate issues. So, what's important is, am I making progress? Am I making it safer? Have I got enough tools in my toolbox to allow me to deal with that diversity of my operating environments that I have? And I'm not alone, by the way, with this diversity. I mean, there's a lot of utilities that are very confined and small, and hey, I'm in this community, but then there are also a lot of operators that have the same kind of diversity across their operating environment. Consistent enforcement, 8 states, and I'm dealing with the state regulators and the politics in all of those states. And so we're seeing the different way that people address some of these issues. And it's not the same. I'm just gonna say it that way. It's just not the same. And a lot of times people get hung up on small things that, yeah, I get they're in the rules and we need to do a great job on it, and I'm not disputing that. I love the Vince Lombardi quote, and my people will tell you that I am a pain in the neck about compliance and doing all of I have zero tolerance, and that drives my team crazy, but, some of that stuff, it's not really helping. It's not moving safety forward. It's a great way to report and say I did these 5 things, but it doesn't really make it safer. And to me, those take precious resources, and they are precious resources to do things that could be doing things that I got a bigger problem. And then I would love, and my friends at PHMSA have heard me say this before, I would love to be where the airline industry is, where we can be very open and transparent and talk about the issues that we're having and the problems that we've had and self-report when we have problems. And in today's environment, it's really hard for operators to feel like they can do that. You're really afraid about your company reputation. You're afraid of not small fines, but multi-million-dollar fines. And it's easy. It's very, very easy to say I'm going to get the stick out and I'm going to write more rules. but it does not help build that transparent culture. And I frankly, I think that's what we all want. When I look at the airline industry and where they were, in 2000 and prior to that, we had airplanes crash a lot more frequently, right? And look at it today. It just does not happen very, very often. That's because they're very open and transparent in what they're doing. And I think every utility operator in the country would agree that they would love to see the pipeline industry get to the same place. And we're working on it. This is not to say that we're not working on it, but we are working on it. It's going to take a little bit of time to get there. I did have to throw that graph down there just to show that excavation, you've heard this before, excavation remains the biggest threat, third-party excavation for hazardous leaks on our pipeline system, and you can see that high bar right there. That's right off of the PHMSA website. So, and that goes back to that top point there. Regulatory. Okay, this is probably the most controversial slide I have, and I'm just going to admit that right up front. You know, I've spent more than 30 years in the energy industry, and I've worked on the FERC side. I used to work for an interstate pipeline. I've done midstream. So I've done regulated utilities and non-regulated. Seriously, the utility industry by far and away carries the most operating risk and the most financial risk of any segment of this industry that I have worked in. And yet we have the lowest return. Now, I get the customer affordability issue, so I get that interplay. But I am here to tell you, after spending 12 years in the utility industry, even if I am perfect, and I am not, I don't stand a chance of earning my return. And that's just not right, right? I mean, I do have shareholders to answer to, and it's tough some days, right, to deal with some of those issues. So I guess my plea here is not to knock the state regulators by any stretch of the imagination, because we have a great collaborative working relationship with them. But the regulatory model we have today probably needs to evolve as we continue to push pipeline safety down a different path. There's too many ways that companies get themselves in a bad spot. And I can certainly see how people end up making decisions that they otherwise wouldn't make. So, you know, my plea there is the model needs to change and evolve. And hopefully 10 years from now, it'll look very different than the model we have today. Boy, I'd love to see incentives. I am not a lead by a stick person, and I'm just going to admit that. I get we have to have rules and standards. I absolutely understand that. You heard me say before that I am responsible for the safety culture of my company. We have transformed our company's employee safety over the last 8 years. For those of you that are familiar with OSHA rates, we were over 2.4 OSHA rate, and we are now below 1. And when I send my safety people back to count up, we have had 700 fewer injuries because of that in our employee base, and I feel really good about that. We have got our people in a different place. We did not do that by beating them over the head with a stick. And for those of you who do operations, you know that safety culture and safety programs are best driven by the employees, and changing the way the employees approach their work and do their work every day. And pipeline safety and public safety is the same thing. If we can get some leading indicators and some incentives out there, I guarantee you companies will knock it out of the park, because that's what we do. So, and that's part of that evolve the regulatory model. Can we get to a different place and not just depend on more rules and a bigger stick? Let's also depend on some leading indicators to incent people with the behaviors we want. There's that code as a minimum again. It's, you would not believe how much time and energy I spend talking about that with a lot of our regulators, consumer groups. And again, I understand the interplay between customer affordability, but we've got to figure out how to improve that dialogue and how to get people to understand that we really do need to be able to do beyond the code. And it is a part of doing business. It's a cost of running a business when you're a pipeline operator. And then I just couldn't help but put this last one in here, I just admit it. There are just some things that, all the states adopt the FERC accounting standards. And let's just be honest about it. It's a lot easier to sell a capital project to your state regulatory commission than O&M. And some of this stuff just doesn't make sense to me that it's classified as O&M. So I would love for us to reevaluate at the federal level what's capital and what's O&M, so that maybe we can classify some of this stuff a little bit differently. It'll also, by the way, be easier on my customers because the rate recovery is different, it has a lower impact on their rate. So now, as long as we're doing wish lists, I mean, that was my regulatory wish list. I thought I'd move to technology and R&D. And my team thinks I'm crazy, but, you know, whatever. I'm the boss, that's right. And I know National Grid's working on this, but cost-effective methane detectors, right, for residential and commercial. And boy, then I'd love to use the smart grid. Because here's the deal. And every utility operator in the room, and I know there's at least one sitting over here, and I know there's a couple more, but you get to an incident or an issue, and here's what I hear. This happens more regularly than you might think. I've been smelling gas for 2 days. I was wondering when you guys were going to get here. My last line of defense is the no's of the public and the customers. But you got to call me, right? And then I'll be there in a flash because that's what I do. But I can't count on that as my last line of defense because people don't always call. We've seen it with East Harlem. We've seen it in a number of incidents, right? So wouldn't it be cool if we had an inexpensive methane detector in a house and it was connected to your smart meter and I got an alert in my gas control that says we got methane in a house and I can just dispatch a truck, hallelujah, right? Instead of waiting for someone to call me. Same thing with methane detectors in urban areas and auto dispatch. A mesh of methane detectors on some of the meters in a downtown area, because nothing scares me more than a bore hit in a downtown area, and I bet Sue's in the same place. Yep, it's absolutely terrifying when I see those come across my email. And if I got a detection of methane in an urban area and I can auto dispatch a truck and get a crew down there and start looking for it, that would be fabulous. Instead of, again, waiting for somebody to call me because they smelled it. Tracking and traceability, it's a great thing. That rule is going to come out, I think, pretty soon. We all want it. It's not going to be trivial to implement. So we need to work on some technology to maximize those benefits and minimize the cost of implementing that. And again, that's what companies do best, right, is find productive ways to get the work done. So we got to figure out how to do that. And then this is just a partial list of what I'd like to see in the tools, to be perfectly honest. I will tell you right up front, we committed early on, probably 2008-ish, that ILI was going to be our preferred inspection methodology for our transmission lines. That makes me probably a little different than most of the other operators that work in the utility space. But I am an old pipeliner. You heard me say I'm an old pipeliner, and so I believe in the technology. I saw it when I was working for the interstates, and I know what it's capable of. And we are about 60% through our system. So my goal with making that investment was I know the tools are only going to get better, and they're going to be able to tell me more stuff sooner, and I'm going to be able to fix it before there's a problem. And that's why we committed to doing that. But, and they have gotten better, by the way. It's absolutely astounding what they will tell us. I mean, they literally will tell you, at this GPS mark at 2 o'clock on the pipe, you have this problem. And the reality is most of the time when I go dig right there, I do have that problem. I mean, sometimes it's not quite right, and we feed all that data back into the system so that it'll keep getting better, but it's really astounding what it can tell us. But it can't tell me everything about my pipeline. And remember, I bury my best work. So it's not like my electric lines where I can just go look and see and send a guy up in a bucket truck. It's buried under the ground. And it's not trivial to go look at it, particularly if it's under an interstate or a river or on a 12,000-foot mountain pass and it's January. So I need better tools. And I need tools that I can also get into some of these distribution lines with tight fittings. I have flow problems in my distribution system that make it very challenging for me to control the speed I figured out how to do it in some areas, but it's not a trivial challenge. So we need a ton of R&D help and a ton of technology help. The industry doesn't have a real consistent way to support R&D today, and frankly, a lot of state commissions won't let you include it in the cost of running the business. So it would be fabulous, and PHMSA, I think PHMSA does a great job of trying to do grants and trying to focus the R&D, but this is my plea for we can do more and we can do better, right? And like I say, this is just a partial list of some of the challenges the utility operators face, and we'd love to see more of. I'll just give you, I don't mean for it to sound like it's and I don't want to scare anybody, but you heard me say 60% of the system. Marie-Therese has heard me say this. I've made 3,000 repairs on my system, and there were over 250 of them that were pretty serious repairs. So to us, it's been worth every penny we've spent on it, but the data is also clear that says I need to keep going and I need to keep assessing my pipelines. So I'm very, very fortunate that we have a great collaborative relationship with our states, and we can use this data to show them that we need to keep working on it, and they've been very supportive with the work that we're doing. But that same work needs to spread. There's a number of other operators doing the same stuff, but more tools will make it spread a lot faster and a lot easier for a lot of the operators. And I think that was it. How'd we do?
All right.
All right.